Good evening. From Genesis chapter 4 till the present, we have had story after story of people reacting, acting out in anger. And it's an unfortunate side effect sometimes of my work is sometimes I get to deal with after effects and not as much as like police officers, but I do see it. I get sessions with people that have been abused and hurt, and there's a maxim that, for example, in a home, in a family, if a man hits a woman, he will continue to hit the woman. That's the way it works. And usually, unless he gets help, it's going to continue on until she's dead. And I shouldn't say usually. There's a possibility of it. And there always will be. These kinds of things are just a very brief example of what we understand that anger can do to us. We see it in so many ways right now, don't we? And we see it all around. And we maybe even shake our heads. We may not understand their place, where they're coming from. We may understand it completely, but we can't condone anger and violence. And we all know that these things don't really work for our benefit, right? The wrath of man does not bring about the righteousness of God. It can't do it. We're not able to make things right simply by having enough anger. And yet we see it stirred. And we find ourselves in bad situations as well. We find ourselves in situations in the car. We find ourselves in situations on Facebook. We find it at our jobs. We find it in our homes. We find it all over the place. We have temptation after temptation regarding anger. We need to recognize that this is part of what it means to have self-control. And this is one of the biggies, right? This is one of the things that a lot of people have a lot of trouble with. And as we get older, we learn more and more about how to control ourselves and that kind of thing. We don't see outbursts as much in different places, but sometimes we still have a struggle with maintaining our composure. What is it that we do whenever we're angry? You know, Paul said that we can be angry, but do not sin. And we'll talk about that a little bit tonight, but we're going to look at what anger is, or really how it relates to self-control and how we can use self-control, how we can grow in that and actually increase. Now, as I've said before, I've tried to take the positive route on this about self-control and looking at the fact that it's not just stopping things, but it's about also doing things. And this lesson is going to be a little bit about that, but it's mainly about how we can control ourselves. And in those situations, what is it that we can do? And so it's not going to be anything new that you've never heard before, because it's from the Bible, so it's not new. But it is hopefully a reminder for all of us in our difficult times that we're facing. What is it that we do with the anger that we have? Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26 and 27 is really the foundation for this. And this is where he talks about sin or not sinning whenever we're angry. He says, be angry and do not sin. Now, if you'll notice, at least in my translation, it may not be in yours, that's in quotation marks. It's as if he's quoting someone else. But then he continues on. He says, do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. So we understand that we have the idea that we can be angry without sinning. But we need to also recognize that there's qualifiers there too. There are qualifiers there that he says is to make sure that we do not let the sun go down on our wrath, and that we do not give place or room or a foothold for Satan. So this is one of the reasons that we need to be aware of anger and how to deal with it best in our lives. Because if we are not careful with it, we're going to violate Scripture. Even if we do not act on it, we can still violate things, especially if you look at the two ideas that are already been presented about letting not the sun go down on your wrath and not giving Satan a foothold. And if there's anything Satan is good at, he's good at getting you to leave a foothold. Let him have an inch and he'll take a mile, right? I remember hearing a story from a missionary that he told in this particular country. I think it was Nigeria. I'm not positive. But it was an African country, and in this country, the culture is so strong about related to allowing people into your home and hospitality, that kind of thing, that if you were to go into their home and put a nail in the wall, it's your nail, you put a nail in the wall, they wouldn't be allowed to take it down. That's what their culture says, because they should allow you to enter in and you do whatever you want to through the things. That's how it worked. Now, I'm sure that there's some regulations and laws related to those things, but this is the story that was told, and so I have to accept it at face value. So he says, what happened one day was Satan came to visit, and he put a nail on a wall, and he left. And they couldn't touch it. They wouldn't touch it. And so a week later, he came back. And when he came back, he had a bag of meat, and he hung it on that nail. Now, culture told them that's his nail. It's his bag of meat. They couldn't do anything with it. And he left, and he was gone for weeks. And the entire house stank. And they wouldn't do anything about it. That's exactly how Satan works in our lives. If we allow him a foothold, he'll put all kinds of bad things in there, and we'll feel trapped, like we can't do anything about it. But we can. We can clean out the house. We'll talk about that. It's important for us to understand this. We can't always change what happens to us. We can't even always know what's going to happen to us, but we always can make a decision of how we're going to act upon it. So that's what we're going to talk about, how we're going to respond, what is appropriate for us to do, and maybe hopefully some tools to help us through there. First of all, we need to recognize what I've already said, that anger is not sin. He said, be angry and do not sin. And he's not contradicting that. He did qualify that, but that doesn't mean that we're sinning just because we're angry. And people have told me that. I got angry, so I was sinning today. That's not necessarily the same thing. Jesus was angry. I can't imagine Jesus fashioning a whip of cords and going through the temple and cleansing it and saying the things that he did without having some anger. Now, the thing is that Jesus was angry, but he didn't sin. He dealt with the problem. He had the right to go in and clean out the temple because he's the one that made the temple. He's the one that designed it and told Moses what to do for it. And actually, the temple was told to David, but he's the one that had that right. Wasn't any question about that. But his anger did not cause him to sin. So we can be angry, and it doesn't mean there's sin. There's some things that should cause us to be angry. In fact, there are things that cause God to be angry. There's 7 things that's listed in the Proverbs, 6 things that angers God, and 7 things that he hates. There are things that we do that God, it angers him. And there's nothing wrong with that. So there's some things that should anger us, but it really depends then on, once we become angry, what do we do with that anger? What is it going to motivate us to do? And that's one of the things about emotions. If you think about the word emotion, if you take the E off, what is left is the word motion. Emotions are intended to put us into motion. And actually, this is the case. If you actually take an emotion and you don't actually do something with that emotion, then it can actually destroy you. It can hurt you. Now, what the problem is sometimes we take that emotion and we put it into gear and we do something. It motivates us to do something, but we really don't know what to do with it. So we do the wrong thing. We make mistakes and we cause trouble, and it actually can make things even worse. But just because we can do something wrong doesn't mean that we have to do something wrong. So what is it that we do with that? That's the first recognition that we can see here, where he says to be angry but do not sin. We can accept it for what it is. It is something that motivates us. It is something that is a recognition in our mind that there is something that is not right and something needs to be done about it. Now, if that's the case, and this is what anger does, it promotes us, and it's a very strong emotion. It makes us sometimes do things, or motivates us to do things that we may be afraid to do otherwise. Then it can be actually a good thing for us. The second idea that I want to cover tonight is that self-control, how to have self-control while we're angry. All right, there's just 3 ideas here that the scriptures talk about, and there are probably a lot more than this, but here from most of these from the Proverbs. And as we go through, I want you to think about how this applies to you and maybe situations that you found yourself in. The first one is to slow down. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 29. Speaking of slowing down, I feel like I'm taking forever. There it is. He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly. We need to learn how to just slow down, not be impulsive, not react. There's so many times where I've had the opportunity to react and I took it, right? We all can think back to those times in our life. And every single time I've reacted quickly, I always regret it. It's very rare that I would ever do something out of anger that actually helps the situation, unless I stop, I slow down, I think about what's going on. Look in Proverbs chapter 16 and in verse 32. Says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Now, look at the comparison, the parallelism. The first line here is, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty. And we see there a parallel statement. He explains what he's talking about. We can see what he means by mighty when he talks to them as one. It says, then he who takes a city. So this is a mighty conqueror. This is someone who can go in and take over a town by force. He says the one who is slow to anger is better than the one who can actually take a city. The one who rules his spirit. See, that's his point. Slow to anger, ruling your spirit, those are synonymous. So in order to rule over our spirit, we need to make sure we are slow in the way we respond to anger. And what he's talking about here is not that we are slow in the sense that our emotions, we have a control over our emotions and how hard and how quickly they hit us. We usually can't control what happens in our emotions. It's an instant reaction. We can't slow that process down. What we can slow down is ourselves, our minds, our decision-making processes. We slow our bodies down. And in order to do that, what really helps with that is to take a deep breath. In fact, we've all heard the adage that we should count to 10, right? That's for specifically so that we will slow our bodies down. We slow our breathing down, and that slows the mental process down. We don't panic as much. We're not in much as an uproar and a tizzy. When we make decisions, it's going to be better for us. And that's the next point here. But look in chapter 19, also in verse 11, before we move on, where he says, the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. We're going to come back to that one too. But we need to slow down. The second idea here is that we need to engage our brains, and that means we just need to think. And usually what happens is when we react in anger, we are reacting based upon some kind of a program that's already introduced into our mind. When we were little children and we reacted in a certain way, that kind of was programmed. Okay, this is how you react when you become angry, and you're going to instantly react. You already know in your mind what you're going to do, but you know you haven't thought about it yet. It just popped into your head. Where did it come from? It's our brain. Our brain is programmed, has been programmed whenever we were young to act in certain ways. And the first thing we think of is definitely usually not the right thing to do. So engage our brain. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 18 says, a wrathful man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger allays contention. See, stirring up wrath is what we're talking about here. And this is stirring up strife. This is someone who is wrathful. This is someone who is angry and vindictive, and his reactions are to simply try to cause trouble. He's stirring up trouble. He's stirring up strife. And that's certainly not what we want to do. And that's easy for us to do, though, isn't it? I don't know how many, it's been very tempting for me to do that sometimes. In chapter 29 and verse 22 of Proverbs, it says, an angry man stirs up strife, a furious man abounds in transgression. That's one of the reasons that we need to be careful how we respond, how quickly we respond, and make sure we think about what we're responding, how we respond, because it's a furious man abounds in transgression. And we see that happening. We see it happen in people around us, and it's very dangerous for us to allow ourselves to get worked up over things, allow other people to have control over us. We can see examples of this all throughout the Bible in different places. And one that comes to mind is in the book of Acts when They remember when they had the assembly in Athens because, or Ephesus, excuse me, because they were being accused of taking away the livelihood of the people who were selling the gods. And they stirred up a mob. And in fact, it says in the book of Acts that one of the funny things about mobs, it says, and a lot of the people who were there chanting and in anger didn't even know why they were there. They just got caught up in the wave of it. And we've seen this demonstrated in our own country as well. We've seen how people, we have what they call mob mentality, and people will get caught up in these things, and they'll start protesting and rioting and tearing things up, and it gets very dangerous, sometimes very quickly. And the reason for that is, it's the stirring up of the emotions, and fire feeds upon fire, and it just continues to burn hotter and hotter. We know how that works. But a lot of the times, if you were to actually go to the protests that you see anywhere, for any kind of protest, and you ask them, why are you here? What is it that you're protesting? They probably won't even agree what they're protesting. They have their own idea of what they're trying to do. It doesn't matter to them. What matters is they have this stirred up within them. So we need to be very careful. We need to engage our brains. We need to think. And we can't really think unless we slow down first. And then we also have the last point I think we should look at is James chapter 1, verse 26. And that is that we need to watch the things that we say. And I'm drawing a complete blank here. Let me open this up. James chapter 1 and verse 26. If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. If we apply that to the context of anger, which is not necessarily here talking about anger, but we can apply that in context. If we are not careful with what we say, we can throw our religion is worthless. If our relationship with God and our understanding of the Bible does not cause us to watch the things coming out of our mouth, it doesn't prevent us from saying things that we regret saying, our religion is useless to us. What good does it even do if it can't even do that? That's his point. And that's something that we need to recognize. We need to have self-control. We need to learn how to take a breath, think about what the situation is, and watch the things that come out of our mouths. Sometimes it means that we have to come at it from a different perspective. Sometimes it means that we have to take ourselves out of the equation. We kind of look at this as you would a third party, a bystander. And that actually does help. It helps you remove yourself from the situation. It could be that you envision seeing the situation you're in from a helicopter. That actually helps. These kinds of things can help you do that. It can remove you from that pressure, and you start observing things instead of reacting to things. And when you start observing, you are allowed then to start thinking. You start seeing things a little more clearly. You understand some things that you may not have understood before. You may even realize that this really isn't about you. And then you might realize that it is about you. But whatever it is, you need to have a clear understanding of what's going on. And the only way we can do that is to slow down, think about the situation, watch the things that we say, because we can make things much worse very easily, and then we can assess and move from there. But until we do that, we really can't move on. And it's so easy for us to forget some of these, right? And the next thing you know, you're in a situation that, how did this happen? Where did this come from? Now, some people may do things to you, and it has nothing to do with how you react, but we still have to choose how we react from there. The third idea I want to talk about tonight is we need to train ourselves. We can train ourselves to use anger properly, even to diffuse anger. There are some times that we get into a situation where we become angry, and it used to maybe serve a purpose in our lives. We at one time, maybe we had to react angrily because of a situation that we were in, and that's a good thing that we had. And then it could be later on that we're in a different set of circumstances, and there really is no reason for us to react that way anymore. So, for example, if someone who grows up in an abusive home, and they have developed a defensive mechanism of anger in order to help protect themselves from the situation they were in. it's very possible that those walls that come up when they have anger involved with it is very useful for them at the time, but then they get out of the situation. They're no longer in that situation anymore, and they still react every time in the same ways. Every time the stimulus comes for them to be angry, they automatically assume it. They automatically jump into it, and it's just not useful anymore. So we need to learn how to think differently about life and the circumstances that we're in, and use common sense, as we're going to talk about. But think about this. We need to practice changing our thought patterns. This was something that I struggled with in my young adulthood. I had a I had a very bad problem with. I wouldn't say that was like flying off the handle or things like this, but I would react to my children or to my wife in ways that was not appropriate. And it amazed me how quickly I could become angry. I don't like saying that, but that's the reality. That's where I was. And I had to learn how to think differently. And actually, I did this. I practiced reacting differently to my family. So when they came, for example, if my children came and they asked me for something, my automatic response, without even think about it, was always no. And it was always a no in such a way as not just no, it's no, and leave me alone and don't ever ask me about it again. When I realized I was doing that, I had to learn how to change my reaction. So I would practice it. They would come to me and I'd say no, and I'd catch myself, and they would already be gone. Then I'd go talk to them and say, no, let me react differently. And before long, I started changing my pattern of behavior. I did this to Carla too, and I would go back to her, and I don't know if she remembers. I'd go to her and I'd say, I didn't do that right. Let's try this again. And she would humor me and walk me through it. And when that happened, I started training myself that there actually is a different way to do this, and I started reacting differently. And sometimes they didn't know that I was practicing it, but I was. So you get better and better at it, right? These are just skills that we have to learn. So we practice changing our thought patterns. We also need to probably choose better associates. Look over back in Proverbs chapter 22. We know that Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 13, that bad company corrupts good morals. In Proverbs 22, verses 24 and 25, it says, make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul. This helped me tremendously. I stayed away from people who are always angry. And I would suggest everyone do that. Life is a whole lot better, too. It feels a whole lot better. When you're around angry people, and all they do is foment and fume, and they're angry about everything, what do you start doing? You start thinking the way that they think. You start seeing things the way they see them. Everything in the world can make some people mad, and they get mad, and they're very good at finding all the reasons why they should be mad, and they don't mind telling you why you should be mad as well. And before long, you're seeing the same things. You're like, I can't believe that. And you start noticing it on your own. You actually get trained by your friend to think angry thoughts. But when you get away from those kind of people who are in our culture we call toxic people, you start thinking for yourself and start thinking better thoughts, you can actually help that. And this is from the Bible. It tells us to make no friendship with an angry man. That doesn't mean that you shun everyone who's angry and write them off and say, I'll never have anything to do with you. But, we choose our associates. We choose to be around the people that can help us. And then we also need to recognize and avoid triggers. There's certain things that we know that's going to set us off. And until we can get a hold of ourselves and train ourselves to do better, we just need to avoid those kind of situations. I used to be this way in public. Believe it or not, I was such a hermit. I didn't like being around people at all. I didn't like people. And I love people now, but I didn't like people, and I couldn't figure out why I didn't have any friends, okay? You think that you'd figure out a correlation there, but I couldn't figure that one out. But because I like certain people, but I didn't like people in general, right? I saw the other day on Facebook, it was something I would have said, so I kind of chuckled. It said, I hate people. That's all it said. And I thought, wow, there's no way I want to say that, because I used to. But when we start thinking that way, I had to be careful. So what I would do is I wouldn't go shopping. because it triggered me every time. I would get angry every single time, and I couldn't help it. Now, I say I couldn't help it. I'd had to learn better. And when I learned better then, Carla, she even got to where she wouldn't even ask me if I wanted to go. She already knew what the answer was. Now I actually go shopping with her sometimes, and I would probably go more if she asked me to go, but I'd rather not. But it's just because I don't like walking around looking at stuff I can't buy. But it's not because I hate people. But anyway, those thought patterns have to change and develop. So give yourself some time, right? We all grow. We all have things that we struggle with. And it's okay if you struggle with anger. But there's no reason to put yourself into situation after situation where you're not handling it right until you learn how to get a handle on it. The next slide here, and this is related to training ourselves, is I want to look at several passages that talk about some common sense things about how to deal with anger. The first one is to use soft words. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 1 says, a soft anger turns away wrath. And if you have ever been in a confrontation with someone who's angry, use soft words, and not just tone of voice, although that does help. It can diffuse a situation very quickly. Someone comes, you're angry. I learned this in customer service. If you'll simply whisper. Now, not too low, because then it'll make them even mad for that, but you lower your tone, you slow it down, and they will start matching it. They'll see that there's no reason to continue to yell, usually. It also, though, can really help if you use words that are soft, right? In fact, it could be like giving them the benefit of the doubt. I had a situation recently where someone was hurting, and he was just lashing out, sending me text message, and they were some of the most terrible things anyone has ever said to me. And at first, I started responding. And I wasn't being ugly, but I was just direct. Stop that. You don't know making any sense. And then he kept at it, and I said, this isn't going anywhere. So I just sent him a text message back, said, you very well could be right about everything. And if that's the case, maybe you're a better person than I am, and I'm okay with that. And you know what it did for the next text message? He didn't text me anymore. He put me in a group message with other people. But he didn't like the fact that I was responding in a soft way. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that, because he did respond a few more, but the tone dialed way, way down. And that's something that helps. Okay, so use soft words. We also can look at Proverbs 19:11, and we can learn to overlook some things and just let it slide. This helps us if someone is angry with us. It also helps us if we're angry with someone else. Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 1 says, no, that's not where it is. 19 verse 11. It says, the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. Now, this really relates to the next point, and that is we need to deal with it quickly. We need to make a decision quickly of how we're going to deal with this. And this, related to us, means that I need to decide, what am I going to do now? How am I going to act in this situation? And I can't give you an answer for that. It depends on your situation that you're in. But you want to make sure you do what is good, right? You want to try to diffuse the situation. You want to try to calm yourself down if you're angry. You want to try use that emotion in order to motivate you to do something that's positive and helpful for the situation. Or if it's someone else who is angry with you, they've done you wrong, and they're angry, and you're causing conflict, or maybe you've done something wrong to them, so they're angry about it. You have to make some decisions. Sometimes it's just a matter of allowing it to just let it go. There are times when we all, as Christians, as human beings, we might rub each other the wrong way. Have you ever run into someone, their personality is something about it, you just couldn't get along with them no matter what? I've had a few people in my life that way, and it wasn't just because of me. It was just, I don't really know. I tried my best to get along with them, and it just seemed like I couldn't, because everything they did seemed to be an insult to me, an insult. So we have to learn to do some things. Matthew chapter 18 and verse 15 is one option, and the other option is Proverbs 19 and verse 11. Matthew 18:15 says, if your brother sins against you, go to him and talk to him about it. I want to suggest that there are a lot of things that don't really need to fall in this category. but we put them in there. I, I had a friend who believed that this passage meant that every little insult that anyone ever did against him, he had to make a list of it and go talk to them about each individual one until they cleared it up. That's all he did, was talk to his friends about the way they've insulted him. So that seems to be a little bit extreme, right? We also have this passage in Proverbs chapter 19, verse 11, that says it's to the glory of a man to overlook things, right? We're not giving people a pass. We just need to recognize that sometimes we do things and people do things to us that is out of character for them. They just had a bad day. Something was going wrong. And so we need to be able to just overlook some things and not be so sensitive about things. And that's a very important one. Now, we have two options. That's not the only options. Those are not the only two options we have. Everything else, any other options that we take, is probably the wrong option. We have a lot of things that people do. Usually what we'll see is when people get upset, usually when there's a misunderstanding, so somebody says something and they take it the wrong way. The first thing that they may do is not even talk to their friend who said it, but go talk to other people about it, right? That's the wrong reaction. Deal with it quickly. Either forget about it and don't mention it to anyone else, or go talk to them. They're the one that said it. In today's culture and in today's environment, this is a big one. And I've seen it happen so many times where someone will take an innocent statement and completely twist it and say, you meant this. And even though the original statement was explained by the one who said it and said, I meant this, it doesn't matter what they said anymore. What matters is how they took it and what they decided to do with it. Well, if they would simply, that just tells me that they want to be angry, if they would simply go to that person and honestly have a discussion with them and say, this is what I heard, and I don't know if you actually meant to say that. You can straighten a lot of things up. But if you don't want to take the time to do that, you don't think it's important enough to do that, the next option you have is to just forget it. Let it pass. Chalk it up to something that was having a bad day. Forgive them in that sense. Now, I understand that forgiveness is a word, something that Jesus said they can be forgiven if they repent, certainly. But in the sense that we use the word forgiveness, we use it in two senses. In one sense, though, it really means forbear. And that is, to forbear means we just kind of give it up. We just don't worry about it anymore. And someone described this the other day for me, and it really hit home. A lady said, to forgive means that you stop holding the list. You stop holding the list of things that they've done against you, and you give it up. And it dawned on me that sometimes we hold on to that list because we're afraid that if we don't hold on to that list, then God will never address it in the future. I knew a man who had a list of people that he couldn't stand, people that done him wrong. And he would not give up that list. He had it written down. He knew exactly what order they were in. And what happened was, I don't know if he still holds the list or not, but he didn't want to give it up. And he thought that as long as he held on to that list in the day of judgment, that'll be taken care of. You see, God already knows the list. God already knows what we've done. He knows what you've done. He knows what I've done. And there are some things that should be on a list somewhere that are not because of the blood of Jesus. And I'm really thankful for that. And I don't know how many other people are on other lists that they shouldn't be on because they're not on God's list anymore. We don't need to be holding the list. God needs to be holding it. So we either need to deal with them directly and confront the idea, confront the problem, or we need to just let it slide. Don't worry about it anymore. Don't bring it up anymore. And if you keep finding yourself bringing it up and you can't let it go, that's a sign for you that you need to go talk to that person. Let them know. I've had people come to me and talk to me and tell me that they were angry about something that I did months before. I had no earthly idea that I had offended them. And they held it for months. And they finally decided they need to come talk to me. And their attitude was not a very good one because they assumed they had all this stuff. You know, over months of time, you work up a lot of ideas. They had a whole slew of things to talk to me about. And if they would have just come to me with that one situation, we could have had it resolved. We could have had a better friendship. Everything would have been great. I've done the same thing to other people, though. Have you? We need to be careful because Satan is really good at getting that foothold. And when anger comes in, we can react and we can do things that we definitely want to regret. And we know that he's good at what he does. He definitely knows how to win. And if there's anything good you can say about Satan, it would be that. He knows what he's doing. He's had thousands of years of practice. And most of us have had only a few decades of it. Trust God, do things the way he said to do them, and you won't have to worry about it. And the last thing I want to say about that is the last line there is to seek help. If you're having a struggle with this, you're not alone. You're not the only one that has anger issues if you have them. There are a lot of people that have them, and they hide them. And the worst thing you can do, honestly, with anger is to try to hide it because it's going to come out, and when it does, it's going to boil over, and it's not a good situation. You need to find help. It doesn't mean that you have to go to a counselor, although it might. It might mean that you sit down with someone and say, I'm really struggling with this. Can we come up with a plan for how I can get through this? I'd be glad to help you with that, or anyone else here I think would be glad to help you with that if you have need. Or maybe you're not a Christian. You need to put on Christ Jesus. It doesn't matter what we've done in the past. If we are a faithful child of God, we can be forgiven of everything. And the only way that's going to happen is if we become a child of God. And if you believe that Jesus is the Christ, according to John chapter 1, you have the right to become a child of God. And we do that by being born again, John chapter 3, verses 3 and 5. We're born again of the water and the Spirit. If we can help you with that, we want to help you with that. Or if you are a Christian, you've been living a life, maybe it's been hidden. Whatever it is, you need to take care of it. And if we can help you, please come and stand and sing.